In 1898, a family portrait captured what should have been impossible. The Thompson family of Hartford, Connecticut sat for their annual photograph in their elegant parlor. The room was decorated with rich mahogany furniture and expensive Persian rugs that spoke of wealth and refinement. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light across the ornate wallpaper, creating the perfect setting for a family portrait. Father Charles stood tall behind the burgundy velvet chair, his thick mustache perfectly groomed and his dark suit immaculate. Mother Beatrice sat gracefully, her silk dress perfectly arranged, her delicate hands folded in her lap. A string of pearls adorned her neck, catching the photographer's light. Their 3 children gathered close around them. Eldest son William, age 16, stood proudly beside his father, already showing the strong jawline that would make him a handsome young man. Middle daughter Margaret, 14, posed demurely next to her mother, her auburn hair arranged in careful ringlets. And there, in the front, sat 8-year-old Clara with her favorite porcelain doll clutched tight against her chest. It was a picture of Victorian prosperity and family unity, the kind of portrait that would hang in parlors for generations, a testament to happier times and family bonds that seemed unbreakable. The composition was perfect, the lighting flawless, the expression serene and content. But there was something terribly wrong with this image. Clara Thompson, the youngest child smiling sweetly in the front row, had been dead for over a year when this photograph was taken. I discovered this impossible image while working as a digital archivist at Yale University's Beinecke Rare Book Library. My job involves scanning old photographs and documents, preserving them for future generations. The work requires patience and attention to detail, carefully handling fragile materials that tell the stories of people long forgotten. Most days blur together in a quiet rhythm of glass plates and clicking scanners, the soft hum of digital equipment filling the sterile archive room. But when I opened the estate donation from the old Hartwell mansion on a rainy Tuesday morning, everything changed. The wooden box was heavy, filled with dozens of glass plate negatives from the 1890s. Each plate was wrapped in tissue paper and stored in individual slots, protected from light and moisture for over a century. Family portraits, wedding photos, and childhood memories trapped in silver nitrate. The collection belonged to a local photography studio that had operated in Hartford during the Victorian era. I was halfway through the collection when I found the Thompson family portrait. At first glance, it seemed perfectly normal. A wealthy family from Connecticut's Gilded Age, captured in their finest clothes in what appeared to be a routine family photograph. Then I checked the documentation that came with the glass plate. The photograph was dated October 15, 1898, written in faded ink on a small paper label attached to the storage sleeve. But according to the Hartford City records I cross-referenced through the Connecticut State Library database, Clara Thompson had died of scarlet fever on September 3, 1897. The death certificate was clear and official, bearing the seal of the Hartford Board of Health. More than 13 months before this portrait was taken. I spent the rest of that day double-checking everything. Birth certificates from the Hartford City Hall, death records from Mount Calvary Cemetery, newspaper obituaries from the Hartford Current Archives, all confirmed the same impossible truth. Clara Thompson was officially, legally, and medically dead when she posed for this family portrait. Yet there she sat, clear as day, looking directly at the camera with those dark, unblinking eyes that seemed to follow me across the room. Something else bothered me about Clara's image when I examined it under magnification. While her family appeared crisp and solid in the photograph, their features sharp and well-defined, Clara seemed somehow translucent. Her edges were softer, less defined, as if she was made of mist rather than flesh and blood. The fabric of her white dress appeared to have a strange quality, almost glowing against the darker tones of the photograph. And her expression was different too. Where her siblings showed the typical stiff formality of Victorian portraits, their faces serious but alive with subtle emotion, Clara's face held an empty, distant stare that seemed to look through the camera rather than at it. I needed to understand how this was possible. The scientific part of my mind rejected what I was seeing, but the evidence was undeniable. My research led me deep into the Thompson family history, starting with Hartford's Historical Society records and the local newspaper archives. Charles Thompson owned several textile mills along the Connecticut River and was considered one of Hartford's most successful businessmen. His factories employed hundreds of workers and his products were shipped throughout New England. Beatrice came from old Connecticut money, her family having made their fortune in the insurance industry. By all accounts, they were a respected, church-going family who kept to themselves, but were known for their charitable contributions to local orphanages and churches. Everything changed after Clara's death in September 1897. The scarlet fever epidemic had swept through Hartford that summer, claiming dozens of children from wealthy and poor families alike. Clara had been healthy and vibrant one week, playing with her dolls in the garden, and gone the next. Newspaper society pages that once regularly mentioned the Thompson family's charity work and social gatherings fell silent. The Hartford Women's Club noted Beatrice's absence from their monthly meetings. Neighbors later told reporters that the family became reclusive, rarely leaving their grand mansion on Prospect Street. The servants whispered among themselves about strange sounds coming from Clara's bedroom and the family's increasingly odd behavior. The breakthrough came when I found Beatrice Thompson's personal journal in the university's manuscript collection donated years ago by a distant relative who had inherited the family papers. The leather-bound book was filled with Beatrice's careful handwriting, chronicling her daily life and thoughts. Her early entries painted a picture of overwhelming grief that consumed her every waking moment. She wrote of hearing Clara's footsteps in the hallway late at night and feeling small hands tugging at her dress when she passed Clara's empty bedroom. At first, she dismissed these experiences as grief playing tricks on her mind, the natural result of losing a beloved child. But the entries grew more disturbing as winter approached. Beatrice became convinced that Clara's spirit lingered in their home, unable or unwilling to move on to whatever came after death. She wrote of cold spots in Clara's bedroom that made her breath visible even on warm days. She described toys that moved on their own, Clara's favorite music box playing its melancholy tune in the middle of the night. Charles tried to reason with his wife, bringing in doctors who prescribed rest and laudanum for her nerves. But Beatrice grew more desperate with each passing day, her handwriting becoming increasingly frantic and difficult to read. In March 1898, salvation seemed to arrive in the form of Mr. Ezra Abernathy. He appeared at their door one cold evening, introducing himself as a spirit photographer and practitioner of the new science that could capture images of the deceased on photographic plates. Abernathy was a tall, thin man with pale skin and dark eyes that seemed to see too much. He claimed he used special chemicals and techniques that made the invisible world visible to the camera's eye, allowing grieving families to see their departed loved ones one final time. Beatrice was immediately fascinated by the possibility. The idea that she could see Clara again, could have a photograph with her daughter that proved she was still somehow present, consumed her thoughts day and night. Charles was deeply skeptical of what he saw as superstitious nonsense preying on his wife's grief. But his wife's deteriorating mental state worried him more than his doubts about spirit photography. The doctors had been unable to help Beatrice, and Charles feared he might lose her as well if something didn't change soon. Against his better judgment, he agreed to let Abernathy attempt his work. The journal entry describing the photography session sent chills down my spine. Beatrice wrote that Abernathy arrived with unusual equipment. His camera was larger than normal, fitted with copper wires and strange glass lenses. He mixed his own chemical solutions, claiming they were enhanced to capture spiritual energy. The family gathered in their parlor for the portrait. Abernathy positioned them carefully, instructing them to remain perfectly still for a longer exposure than typical. He placed an empty chair in front, explaining that Clara's spirit would be drawn to sit with her family. When Abernathy triggered the flash, Beatrice wrote that the room filled with an unnatural cold. The air seemed to thicken, and for just a moment she swore she saw Clara materialize in the empty chair. But something was wrong with the child's appearance. Her skin looked gray, and her eyes held a darkness that hadn't been there in life. Behind Clara, Beatrice glimpsed something else. A tall, shadow-like figure with impossibly long limbs stood against the wallpaper. It had no face, just smooth darkness where features should be. The vision lasted only seconds before the flash faded and normal light returned. Abernathy seemed pleased with the results. He promised to develop the plate and return with their portrait within the week. But Beatrice's final journal entry, written just days after the session, revealed her growing horror. She wrote frantically about the presence that now filled their home. The temperature in the house dropped dramatically. Servants quit without explanation, claiming they heard whispers in empty rooms. Strange accidents began plaguing the family. William fell down the stairs and broke his arm. Margaret developed a mysterious illness that left her bedridden for weeks. Charles's business deals started failing as partners reported feeling uneasy in his presence. Beatrice realized with growing terror that the photograph hadn't captured Clara's spirit. Instead, it had opened a doorway for something else, something malevolent that wore her daughter's face. She begged Charles to find Abernathy and destroy the photograph, but it was too late. The spirit photographer had vanished, leaving only the completed portrait behind. The journal ended abruptly there. Historical records showed that the Thompson family met with tragedy over the following months. William died in a hunting accident in December 1898. Margaret succumbed to her mysterious illness in February 1899. Charles lost his fortune and took his own life in April. Beatrice disappeared entirely, her fate unknown. With this knowledge, I returned to examine the photograph with new eyes. Using advanced digital enhancement software, I analyzed every pixel of the image. When I increased the contrast and adjusted the shadows, something horrifying emerged from the background. There, superimposed over the wallpaper pattern, was the unmistakable outline of a tall, thin figure. Its limbs stretched unnaturally long, and where its face should be was only smooth darkness. The entity stood directly behind Clara, its shadow hands resting on her shoulders like a puppeteer controlling a marionette. The enhancement revealed other disturbing details. Clara's eyes, when magnified, showed no reflection of the camera flash that illuminated the rest of the family. Her clothing seemed to shift and blur at the edges, as if she wasn't entirely solid. Most unsettling of all, the analysis showed that Clara's image was layered differently than her family members, as if she had been added to the photograph through some unknown process. I found one final piece of evidence in a hidden compartment of the original storage box. A letter, written in Beatrice's desperate handwriting and addressed to her sister in Boston. The letter was never sent, suggesting Beatrice died or disappeared before she could mail it. In the letter, Beatrice confessed everything. She revealed that Abernathy wasn't just a fraud taking advantage of grieving families. He was something far worse, a conduit who used spirit photography to feed malevolent entities. The chemical processes he claimed captured spirits actually created doorways between worlds. The photograph, Beatrice wrote, had become a prison. The entity that destroyed her family was trapped within the silver emulsion of the glass plate, but it remained active, influencing anyone who looked upon its image. She warned that the photograph should never be displayed or copied, as each reproduction created new pathways for the entity's influence. As I read Beatrice's final words by the glow of my computer monitor, the digital scan of the Thompson family portrait still displayed on my screen. Something strange began to happen. The overhead fluorescent lights in my office started to flicker in a pattern that seemed almost deliberate. The air grew unnaturally cold despite the building's modern heating system working overtime. I could see my breath forming small clouds in the suddenly frigid air. I looked back at the digital scan displayed on my screen, and for just a moment, the image seemed to shift and change before my eyes. Clara's vacant expression twisted into one of wide-eyed terror, her small mouth opening as if she was trying to scream a warning across the decades. Her mouth opened as if screaming, though no sound emerged from my computer speakers. The shadow figure behind her became clearer, more defined with each passing second, and I could swear its featureless face turned to look directly at me through the screen. Its impossible limbs seemed to reach forward, pressing against the glass plate from within the photograph. I realized with growing horror that by digitizing the photograph and displaying it on my monitor, I had created exactly what Beatrice warned against in her desperate letter. A new reproduction, a fresh doorway for the entity to influence our world. The entity that destroyed the Thompson family over a century ago was no longer trapped in silver nitrate and glass. It now existed in pixels and data, aware of the modern world and hungry for new victims after more than 100 years of imprisonment. The thing that wore Clara Thompson's face in that impossible 1898 portrait was no longer confined to history. It had found a way into our digital age, and it knew I was watching. If you enjoyed this look into a story history tried to forget, hit the like button and subscribe for more. And tell us in the comments what you think was really captured in the Thompson family photograph. Thanks for watching.